Okay, good morning
Morning.
and welcome to the avocado class this morning in Lenny Hills Nursery. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and so we've got a class on avocados today. Let's start with talking about where they come from. So they're all from essentially Central America, and there's supposedly three races that they uh, talk about. There's the West Indian one, which is usually grown in Florida, and then there's the Mexican and the Guatemalan. And generally, what we grow here are the Mexican and the Guatemalan types, or hybrids between the two. So the West Indian ones that they grow in Florida and in Hawaii, most of the tropical areas, truly tropical areas, use those. And now all avocados, there's a range of sizes, but a lot of the West Indian avocados are huge.
Hmm.
Now, generally, if you go to Florida, they'll promote them as the slim cottons because they have a much lower oil content and a higher carbohydrate content, which now we know is not so good. It's better the Mexican Guatemalans, which have just a very low carbohydrate content, like 2% of calories. Most of them are the healthy fats. So the West Indian, or excuse me, the Mexican, the Guatemalan types are certainly we consider the better varieties, and that's what does well here. Now, we're not perfect avocado country because we get some frosts now and then, although we haven't had frost for perhaps, well, 3 years ago we had little frost, but back in 1990 we had our record frost for this area. December 23, 24, 1990, we hit 23 degrees both days here, and a lot of the young avocado trees froze to the ground. They couldn't handle that cold. There was a similar freeze back in around 1900 when they first started growing avocados, say in Altadena, Pasadena area. And that's when the Fuerte variety was chosen because it withstood those frosts. Now we have a lot more varieties than that. So most of the ones we have a little bit of Mexican, a little bit of Guatemalan. They say the Mexican varieties, the new growth is redder, and the Guatemalan not so red. This is a Mexican one here. No new growth at the very moment, so you don't see the colors in it. But mostly the other ones are hybrids between them. Now, we get some avocados in from our supplier on the 2 year level. So this is a second year tree from our supplier Broca, which we consider the best supplier of avocados in California, if not the world. They ship internationally. They do have associations with a lot of the growers in Spain, South Africa, Australia, Mexico, definitely with Mexico. So this is the second year tree that's on clonal roots. The ones we grow are only literally 1 year old from seed right about this point. So a year ago they planted the seeds, grafted them last summer, sent it to us this spring. We potted them up. So when we got them, this was one of the last holdovers. Hoping someone bought it but never picked it up. So we put this. So when we get them, they're in containers not much wider than the pit. So the pits are about this big. The little containers they come in are about this big and about 8 inches tall. And we put them in the pots, and they look like this with our top pot. So we use the top pot potting soil, which we created this for gardenias, but it works well for just about anything you want to grow in it. And 3.5 months later, you get things that look like. So this one, I believe, is our tallest one after 3.5 months from something about that size. Most of them are about this tall. So they've grown quite well. I mean, we expect all these, this one especially, this will be 6 foot by the end of the year, if not higher than that. Now, when avocado trees are young, one thing to note is that sometimes they have trouble figuring out which is their main trunk. So sometimes, we stake up one and then the other one gets bigger. So, okay, we'll make this one just a fruiting branch. If they're horizontal, they tend to fruit. If they're vertical, they tend not to fruit. So if you have several branches and it takes a while to figure out which is the main trunk, these are certainly not something you cut off. You just let them fall to the side. Avocados are very rubbery when they're young, um, unless you grow from seed. So when you grow an avocado pit and grow it, they tend to grow straight up the center trunk, and everything's very symmetrical, just like a Christmas tree. That's how seedlings are supposed to act when these are grafted onto seedlings. So they grow the seed. Well, it's how they do this. So they grew the seed, and you can kind of see the top of the pit here. So they grow the avocado pits in that little container, and when they're about a foot and a half tall, they cut the top of that off, of the seedling off, and then they make a cut into there and stick in. But this was about a 3-inch piece of stem of the tree they're grafting here, Stewart. So they took a branch off of Stewart of the right size and development stage and grafted into a V. So if I pull off the rubber thing here, you can kind of see the V still in the trunk there. So they cut a V in, or just cut a slice in there, wedged it open, and then put this stem in there and matched it up, and it grafts together. And then the top grew. So they grafted these last summer, into fall, most of them. We know that the Don Gilliglees we got, which is this one, were grafted like in winter. So they're the youngest ones we have. They were grafted in winter. But the oldest ones we have, like this one, are probably grafted last summer. I mean, for us, they grafted 1,300 trees. So I don't know how many people are involved. I've seen at least two names. They usually, when they're done with the grafting, they put their name on a thing and attach it to the group of trees, so that the grower knows who is responsible for grafting these. So we've seen at least a couple names. So there's more than one guy doing the grafting. Uh, a lot of work, and they do get paid well for that. There's not many grafters out there, and they graft them in greenhouses. So, they said, okay, this year we're giving you more space in a greenhouse. So we had the option of doing 1,500, but they couldn't get them. Apparently, they don't have 100% success. We got 1,300 out of the 1,500 we ordered. Fortunately, they shorted us on Queen of all, and the Gwen's only got half what we wanted, and a few others only got partly of what we wanted. Sometimes that's due to how many pits that they come up with. So,
Does it matter about the rootstock? Does it matter about what pit they're using?
well, in this year we got 100% Zutano seed. So Zutano is an avocado that's grown for two reasons. Well, the main reason it's grown is because it's a good pollinator for Hass. May not pollinate anything else, but the research shows Zutano is a good pollinator for Hass, and Hass is one of the trees that has kind of a poor production record. So anything you do to promote it is nice. So they have a lot of those fruit that no one wants, because Zutano is not a highly rated avocado for eating. So, but it does have a huge pit. And it's got one of the biggest pits out there, which is good because it stores a lot of energy. So they use the pits because it's essentially the nurse for this new tree. This pit will give them energy for up to a year or more. This thing is still green and active, so some of them have shriveled up by this time, but this one's still real healthy. So the genetics of the pit influence the roots. Now, generally, most Zutano make good roots. And for the last 50 years, Zutano has been the seed root, has been the root system of choice. However, 40 years ago, they started cloning the best of those roots. So the cloned ones, so this tree here is on a clonal root system, which is what the orchards want. So when you've got seeds as rootstock, the vigor of each seed is a little different. So the seeds it's all from Zutano, and so the parents is identical. However, the offspring are like your kids. They're going to be similar but different, slightly different. Sometimes, 1 out of 20 may be a total jerk, and 1 out of 20 may be a genius. You just don't know from seeds what you're going to get. Most of them are very similar to the parent tree. So Zutano has been reliably good, partly because it's huge, partly because it's a strong Mexican variety of avocado. The Mexican varieties are considered more cold tolerant than the Guatemalan. So for rootstock, they prefer the Mexican genetics for cold tolerance, because the ground does get cold here, much colder than it does down in Guatemala, especially. So when we grow our trees, this year we grew a couple hundred, more than 200 trees. We had one tree that grew about a foot and then just flat out died. Okay, there's something wrong with that pit, genetically faulty. And then there's always about 5 or 6, which is 2 or 3%, that just sit there and don't grow well. So we go, okay, those aren't, there's, probably something wrong with those pits also genetically. But we get some that just sky on us, like this one. So what they've done in orchards, over the years, now in orchards, they considered root rot to be the main problem with avocados, although personally, I don't think it's that big a deal unless you've got an orchard with a real low spot where the water just forms a pond in the winter time. That's where they have the root rot problems. I mean, we get root rot more from production practices than we do from anything else than from what you're doing in your yard. So as long as you get the avocados that we grew, most of that is not an issue. But um, so what they did is they went to some farms, back in the 60s and 70s. They would have, they noticed that some areas of the farms got wiped out, but there was a survivor tree in the group of all these that rotted out. So they go, okay, that one has genetically better roots. So they would um, induce the root system to sprout branches, and they take those genetically the same plants and create trees out of those as the rootstock trees. And they're often named after the place, the farm where they were taken from. So this tree, which is a Carmen avocado, was grafted onto Toro Canyon rootstock. So at the Toro Canyon Ranch, they had a good survivor tree, and they took the roots off of that and found it was, somewhat better at root disease, definitely vigorous, more salt tolerant. It had a lot of things going for that root. So we get our Carmen trees grafted on Toro Canyon. Now, certain avocados aren't compatible with certain rootstocks, so they don't have, you can't just choose the rootstock on the top and say, do this for us. They have to have checked it out and make sure it works. So like the reeds we get, they don't graft them on Toro Canyon. They graft them on Duke 7. So when we ask for reeds on a clonal rootstock, they'll give us a Duke 7. Now there's some newer rootstocks that are incredibly sturdy and desirable. One is called Dusa. We're not allowed to sell that. So University of California holds a patent on it until the patent wears off in a few years. We're not allowed to sell to homeowners. You can always say that you're a farmer. So the distinction between a homeowner and a farmer, if you buy 20 avocados of the same kind directly from Brokaw, you're considered a farmer. If you only buy one, they're not going to sell it to you. You have to buy at least 20 of the same variety, and then they'll think you're a farmer, and you can get them on Deuce rootstock. So in the past, when we've gotten Deuce rootstocks, because someone bought, say, 30 and sold us back 25, let's say, because they didn't want all 25. So that's the rules. I mean, I don't think that they care that much. For some reason, University of California does not want to do some. The public, for what reason? It's like, beyond me. Why they don't want a rootstock in people's yards. Anyway, the patent on this should run out in a few years, so then we'll be able to produce the rootstock. But they've got a lot of new ones coming along that are highly precocious. They make whatever's grafted on them bear right away. and don't get too big and are more salt and drought tolerant. This Dusa is not salt tolerant rootstock. And then when I've grown plants on that one, they look terrible, all brown tip leaves, just nasty looking trees under bad conditions. But under good conditions, they're quite good and keeps the tree small and highly productive. So that's what a lot of farmers want. But I would tell you that the Toro Canyon is noted for being drought tolerant and really vigorous. Unfortunately, not real precocious. So this one may take 2 or 3 more years to produce fruit than the Dusa rootstock because it makes a tree. Every tree I've grown on Toro Canyon has grown like 5 to 8 foot the first year in the ground. Just boom, just takes off and goes. So beautiful plants. It takes a few years to get fruit on it. 3 years for a bacon on Toro Canyon, and 5 years for a Carmen on Toro Canyon to start fruiting. Now, the other thing that we don't know, like this one's flowering right now, it wants to fruit. So the other thing that happens with grafted trees in general is that no one keeps track of where this graft wood comes from on the tree. So on citrus, they documented a long time ago, and on other plants too, that if you take, so they're taking the grafting wood they're taking is a branch that's mature and ready to start its next round of growth. So it's not just something that's actually just growing like this is currently growing, so they can't use that as grafting wood. But a branch that has grown and then stalled out like this branch here, this is perfect. It's got the buds at the end ready to pop. It's fully got its energy back after it grew. So that would be a decent branch to use as grafting wood. But where on the tree you take that wood makes a difference on its offspring. So what they documented on citrus, you take grafting wood off the top of a mature orange tree, the baby it makes will flower and fruit and not grow too much. You take a branch off the bottom of that same orange tree, the plant that makes will grow for a few years before it fruits. The bottom of the tree acts more juvenile, the top of the tree acts more mature. So, and no one keeps track of that. So we don't know, like on this guy, if this one's going to flower right away or if it's going to just grow for a few years. Don't know. So that's the unknown. No one keeps track of that. Now, the other thing they know about grafting, so you say, okay, you have the original Carmen tree, take budwood off of that, it'll all act juvenile. But you take a graft off a tree that was grafted from the original Carmen tree, it acts a little more mature. And the further generations you get away from the original tree, the more mature the grafting wood becomes. So a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone will produce much quicker than a clone off the original. So there's a lot of genetics in there. Interestingly, though, we've seen on some plants where they do tissue culture propagation. The tissue culture, when they propagate by tissue culture, they use all these growth hormones. All those offspring act like babies. They look like babies. They may not make fruit for 4 or 5 years. I don't think they do avocados that way, but it's certainly possible to do it. They do figs. They do other fruit trees. They've done other fruit trees that way. We notice when we get them, they look like the seedlings that come up next to my wall. They don't look like they're going to produce for a while. So anyway, so when they make these, the process is interesting. So when they make these, they grow the seed last summer, and in the summer and fall and winter, they're grafting the trees on for us, and then they send it to us. We got them in March. We started planting them up, and when we got this one, it was probably about this tall, and it's grown a couple feet since. They grow in spurts. They grow every growth spurt they have. They do about a foot and a half of growth.
So the difference, a couple of questions. The difference, so it all starts with the seed. That's where you get all of your root, wood, grafting material. What's the primary difference between rootstock and graft? Is it simply just the stage of development? That is to say, the rootstock is the first projection out of the seed, and then the grafting material are the more mature branches. And then the second question is, does the fruit change? flavor or consistency as you get clonal varieties out?
Right. So if you grow a seed, it's like this is the seed of a Zutana, the baby it makes may take 7 to 8 years, well, between 5 and 10 years to mature. That's how long it takes seedlings to mature. And usually they got to grow 10 feet tall, and then they start blooming, and then they start fruiting. But the fruit you don't know what it's going to turn out to be. It could be, again, your chances are 1 out of 20, incredibly good, incredibly bad. Most of it's between. We had one gentleman who said he planted 13 avocado pits of Hass at his house, or what he bought at the store, because not everything at the store is Hass. And they said 8 of them are quite good. 5 of them they don't bother to eat. So that's better than 50%. I mean, they always tell you don't plant seeds. Well, it's mainly a timing issue because most seeds, I've grown one seedling in my life and it came out very similar to its parent. Of course, the productivity is not nearly as high because of the age, but sometimes from seed you get something incredibly good. I mean, that's how most avocados were chance seedlings that people planted, like Don Gilby, which was their fastest hour of the spring. Mr. Don Gilby in La Jolla planted a Hass pit in his yard, and he got this tree that looks nothing like Hass, tastes better, stays smaller, heavier producer, so he got a home run on his. And so chance of home run may be 1 out of, no, again, you'll probably get something decent. You grow one from seed that'll definitely take longer. Now, the clonal ones, they have to graft them twice. So they start with the same thing. They start with the pit, and then when it's tall enough to graft, they graft the Coral Canyon tree down to that one. And the original pot was down here, and they grafted it right about here. And then they let the Coral Canyon tree grow for a while. But then they put it in a really dark greenhouse. We call it etiolation. When it's in a greenhouse or it's real dark, they just keep it in the dark for a while. It thinks it's underground, so it starts to initiate roots off its stem. What they also do is right above the graft they put on it, they put a metal ring on that, which will eventually cut off the circulation. They want to kill the seed root because they don't want that to be the main root of the tree. So they put a ring in there. And then when the tree is this tall, well, it's about this tall, and then they cut that top off and put the Carmen stem on top of that. So this is a 2-year process, costs twice as much as one that hasn't been that way. But now they put this bigger pot around it filled with dirt. That rootstock is rooted out. The seedling root is dying at the bottom. So if you cut open this, and I've done that, I've dissected some of these, and you see the clonal roots, and you see the seed, which is the seed's still alive, but the roots have all died because they got cut off. Uh, and, well, actually, I've seen a lot of dead seeds down there too. And then you've got this up here. So that's how they make the clonal trees. And the reason they want the orchards would rather have, they said 9% of the trees going orchards are cloned rootstock because if the roots are genetically identical, the trees tend to be more uniform in shape and size. Whereas when you grow from seed, each seed may have slightly different vigor. You might get a tree that grows wider, taller, faster, slower, just like what we see. You don't want 10% of your trees just not doing well just because of the seed. Then you got to go and replace them. So you get the clone ones again, or they are twice as expensive as the uncloned ones, or at least 40% more of the uncloned ones. It's worth it for an orchard not to have to go through the orchard and replace trees because of that. For a homeowner, not that big a deal. I mean, we've already culled a lot of the funny seedlings before, since we grew them. A few of our customers, because they buy them when they're this size, get stuck with some bad ones. We already heard of one this morning. It didn't make it. So, but once they get to this size, we figure they're good. And generally, what we expect from a tree this size from this point is that this next winter it'll be mature enough it'll probably bloom and make some fruit next year. Takes a Now in avocados, it takes a year for most of them. It takes about a year from the bloom to harvest the fruit. Now, when you grow avocados, now we grow most of ourselves in containers because we're a nursery. We don't put things that many things in the ground. Although go to my daughter's house, so she's got a lot of avocados she planted in the ground this last year. But so we know a lot about container culture, and certainly, we never thought when Hass was the main tree. Hass was only 15-foot wide, 15-foot tall Hass avocados, only averaging 100 fruit a year. So we thought, you put this in a container, you got, say, a 5-foot wide tree. How much fruit can it make? If a 15-foot wide tree makes 100 fruit, this 5-foot wide tree is going to make maybe 1/10 of that. It's not 1/10 the volume. So what's the worth of growing an avocado in a pot if you only get 1 or 2 fruit per year? But then a friend of mine grew a reed avocado, which is much more productive than Hass, in a 24-inch box. This was 3 years ago, and he had 80 fruit on his tree. We're going, boy, that's worth growing. 80 fruit, that's almost as much as the Hass in the ground is making. So we started looking around at the different varieties, and most of them are much heavier producers than Hass. So Hass, the original avocado, well, not the original, Forte was the original, survived the freeze over 100 years ago, but its productivity is really, we don't know what's going to happen. They say, I have a handbook, avocado handbook, that says in a Forte orchard, 80% of the trees don't contribute to the crop. 20% of the trees make all the fruit, and they haven't figured out exactly why that happens. So we don't sell Fortes because you always hear people tell you, my Forte never fruited. Or another one say, my Forte fruits incredibly well. We just can't predict which one it is. So what's the use of even selling that if your chance of getting a good tree are 20%? You just don't know. So we stopped selling Fortes. And then Hass pretty much is a known thing as being not highly, highly productive as a newer variety. So we kind of quit selling Hass too. Now, Carmen is a Hass genetically. However, it is a Hass that was found in Mexico back in the 1980s by Carlos Mendez. So they call it Carmen for Carlos Mendez. That we've seen this thing bloom 4 times a year. So instead of just the Hass spring bloom, this blooms spring, summer, fall. We've seen it bloom all 4 seasons now. In Mexico, it's the biggest seller because the main bloom down in Mexico happens to be the fall bloom. The November bloom in Mexico makes the avocados they need to sell at Super Bowl. So that's what made the Carmen famous and made more avocados for the Super Bowl, because down in Mexico, the fall bloom is the main bloom. Here, the fall bloom is the worst bloom of all of them because we're going into colder weather. The bees aren't really that active at that time, and it's getting colder on the tree at that time. By mid-November, it's already in the 40s at night again. It's not conducive to good fruiting here. But with Carmen, the average Hass orchard they said in California is 7 tons per acre per year. The average Carmen orchard down in Mexico, 27 tons per acre per year. So they figure Carmen in California should do at least half of what it does in Mexico. So for the last 20 years, Carmen has been Brokaw's best-selling avocado tree, and a lot of the stuff you see at the store now is Carmen. Uh, Brokaw does create about 300,000 of this size tree per year for their orchards, and they said about 200,000 of them have been Carmen for the last 20 years. Now Gem's starting to take over, so Gem is a little bit better for the orchards to handle than Carmen, so it may become the number one. Yes.
So when you say it 4 times a year, is it blooming and starting to produce fruit, but not harvested, and then another bloom? And so you have avocados in different stages on the tree?
Yeah, so not a single tree won't do. So I've had a Carmen on my backyard for 8 years now. One year we saw it bloom all 4 seasons and set fruit all 4 seasons. most years it'll bloom either the spring bloom or the summer bloom, and sometimes only the winter bloom. We don't know what to expect on it, but they say if you have an orchard of Carmens, you can go out there and pick fruit any day you want because the trees are all doing little things different. Now, one of our customers who has had a Carmen bought from us over 10 years ago says this Carmen tree is always blooming. He says it just don't quit. And he sends me pictures because I figured, on most fruit trees, if you got a fruit hanging on a branch, that branch's not going to bloom. So he sent me a picture of a fruit hanging here with flowers blooming right around the fruit. This thing is crazy the way it flowers and fruits. So yeah, it kind of breaks all the rules of a fruit tree. But if you only have one Carmen tree, you may not see that for a while. Like my Carmen has actually taken a year off at times and not done a thing some years after it does a real, incredible thing some years too. But my tree is now we just put it in the ground this year. It was stuck in a pot for 6 years. So that's probably one of the reasons it's not as mature a tree yet. We just put it in the ground.
That was my second question. If you plant them in pots instead of the ground, are the roots going to outgrow the pot, or how is it going to be affected by that?
So all containers have a problem. So my father was a Buenos artist, and what they understand is that the max you get out of a plant in a pot is 10 years because you get so many roots. They grow and live and die in the same area. After 10 years, you got no clean place to grow. So the tree starts to decline after 10 years. So you either get them in the ground into a bigger pot, or you change the dirt in the pot you're using. So on Buenos Aires, they would have the same plant, same pot for hundreds of years. So every 10 years, they pull it out, take off some of the dirt, put on fresh dirt, trim the plant back, because every time you work with the roots, you're going to put the plant in some shock. So they would trim off maybe a third to quarter of the foliage just to make up for that. And then away you go for another 10 years. And you can do the same thing with plants containers, although, once you work with a big container, it's hard to do that. You might as well just plant a new tree every few years and get another one going. But they do, there are plans on the internet that were created back in the 1800s, where in France and Spain or wherever they were doing this, they designed these big wood boxes with bolted sides that you can take off one side at a time. So you can remove the dirt on that side, bolt this side back, do the other side. You can do one side at a time, so you can work with the big trees and replace the soil little by little. So these, we figure this is pretty much outgrown this size container already. Over at only 3 months, goes into a 15-gallon. In 3 months, it'll max out the 15-gallon. And another 3 months, it'll be big enough. You put in a box and it'll be ready for sale in a 24-inch box. Now that's in our top potting soil. Again, we made that specially for us. I've been to another nursery in the San Diego area, and the customer asked them, how much older is your box than the 15-gallon? And they told them 2 years. It takes us 3 months to get a 15-gallon to box size, and the soil that they use. So the problem we're having in the trade is that we don't know of any other nursery other than us that doesn't put ground up wood as a major part, ground up wood or bark as a major part of the soil. So that in itself can cause root rot problems because you put a dead tree in the soil with the tree. Whereas in nature, this is what an avocado orchard would like to be grown in. Is this thing called sandy loam. Decomposed granite's another one, but decomposed granite is very similar to sandy loam. It's primarily quartz. So that's what soil is supposed to be. It's supposed to be quartz, not ground up dead dying trees. And if you grow an avocado tree in that, yeah, it's going to rot. It's very prone to rot, and a lot of the trees we get from those growers are rotting. Now, a couple of years ago, I bought a tree from a nursery down in the San Diego area, Miss Jim, which we wanted to get, and it was in the wrong soil. They planted them in pure coconut core, which is a ground up coconut shell, and it was struggling. We pulled out of the pot, and we can tell the roots were rotten. So I replaced them with our soil. But here now, we did about 10 of them, and 6 of them did pretty well. I don't know what happened to them. We sold them. But this one we've had now, extra 2 years, and it's just not responding. So we believe that, roots were already infected, had a root rot disease going on them, or they got infected in that process of changing the dirt on them. Avocados do not respond that well to root damage, whereas we've fixed a lot of citrus the same way and never had a problem with any citrus fruit we've ever done. The citrus roots are really big and rubbery. Avocado roots are a little bit more brittle. So if you buy a avocado from a different grower, then the tree starts to fail on you. Gets generally, if the roots aren't healthy, get smaller leaves, a lot of brown tip leaves also. And that's a sign of having no roots, put it that way, inadequate root system, small size leaves. The healthier the roots, the bigger the leaves. So if you have, nice big leaves, that plant is real vigorous and healthy.
Yeah. Ask the question, your root height is from say 15 to a 24. So you've got this big ball. Do you try to look for roots that are not healthy and want to just?
No, if we grew them, they're healthy. They're healthy. I mean, so our potting soil, we decided not to try to sell sandy loam as potting soil because, if we had a bag, that 1 cubic foot bag filled with this, it would be about 120 pounds. There's just no way you can lift real dirt. So we made a lighter version of it. It's still mostly quartz. So this top pot that we sell is pumice rock, which is quartz, sponge rock or perlite, which is quartz, sand, which is quartz. Then we did mix some peat moss in here. Peat moss is a plant that did die, not related at all to avocados, and it died like 5,000 or more years ago. So there's no disease issues associated with peat. So it's the least likely. Well, rice hulls are just as inert, and charcoal is very inert too. We actually have a little charcoal in here. So anything that's considerably not going to, if it's not, you can sit this in water and it won't smell. Whereas most potting soils you buy with wood product or bark product, you put in a bucket of water and a week later they smell like a sewer because it's still decomposing. They'll tell you it's finished compost, but it's not finished. Ground up wood and ground up bark aren't finished until they're gone. When they're gone, they're finished decomposing. Up until that point, they're still decomposing and creating conditions that promote root rot. Lack of oxygen promotes root rot. And especially if you have a dead rotten tree next to your roots, what do you think's going to happen? It's just, for some reason, we can't get through to any other nursery to explain to them that ground up tree is not what they should be growing plants in because the universities have promoted that to them. So they believe the professors who don't run a nursery and they don't believe other nurserymen. When I was a kid, my dad grew everything in this. Avocado, citrus, gardenia, this whole nursery was in this soil. And we never had problems with root rot. They didn't invent the term root rot until the 1980s when they started promoting ground up wood as soil. So all that happened with that. So there's a lot of things that are said about not keeping avocados wet. They come from Guatemala. Like, that's rainforest country. It's always wet. And, everyone here, I'm sure, has seen an avocado pit growing in a glass of water. So drainage is really overrated on avocados. If they can sit in a glass of water for a year, healthy roots, the water has nothing to do with the rotting. It's what it is, it's the amount of oxygen in the root system. So if you're lacking oxygen, so if you have soil like this and it stays wet for, say, 2 weeks and it doesn't, the water can't, the water's not moving because it's just sitting in here. Eventually the roots will use up the oxygen in the water and then they'll be in trouble. It takes about, let's say it takes, if you don't get no water movement and there's no access to the atmosphere oxygen for about 3 days, because they said avocado roots can survive without air for 3 days. Uh, that plant roots don't need to breathe as frequently as we do, so they can go maybe 3 days without any movement of water at all. But eventually, you know, if the water just stands there and stands there and stands there, and the soil is very, especially if the soil is clayish, then they might run into root rot problems. They'll certainly run into root rot problems if they're growing in compost. So compost in a pot, even if it's just damp, well, okay, if it's saturated, the air can't get back in there. The water in that pot is still has no oxygen. So if you have compost in a pot, you got to let that thing dry out so that the air can get back in with the oxygen in it. If the soil is still saturated and there's not enough airflow in that mix, it's going to rot in there. Whereas if it's in our soil, you can keep our pots in a tray of water. They're not going to have a problem with that. So,
Question about growing and maintaining. I know avocado trees typically need a lot of water.
Mhm.
Fertilizing every few months.
we're talking about that.
Okay. And pruning too, I was going to ask.
Right. Okay. So anyway, once you have the perfect tree, and just say you live in Santa Ana or Garden Grove, you got good soil there. Anaheim, flat areas, Anaheim have real good soil. You just make a whole drop in, grow like any other plant you would grow, which would just be you have the root system at or slightly above ground. Have your tree up here. Make a nice basin around it with the dirt you pick out of the hole, and the water's good. Make sure that native soil doesn't cover up the original soil, because most native soils, the water doesn't go through it as well as the soil we use in containers. You want to leave that open so the water, the water goes straight in this way, and then it gets sucked out to the sides. The excess water will be, your soil is like blotter paper. It'll suck out the extra water. So that's actually going to be remain on the dry side. You can water this pretty much every day lightly, and it'll stay perfect conditions. If you watered, say out here, the ground will absorb it well, but it will not allow any to go back into the root system. So coarser soils like our top pot or anything the grower uses will not absorb water well from the ground around it. So you have to water them directly over the top. And once the roots, grow out into the surrounding soil, then there's no problem. And it'll take a few months for 5 gallon, well, even a month. They'll grow about an inch or two a month. Once you get that far out to the soil, then you're home free. It'll absorb the water from the soil around it rather than having to depend on what you put right to the root ball. But it's nice if you water with a drip system or you water by hose to make sure the water goes straight to the root ball for at least the first month or so.
Okay, Dave. In Laguna Beach, the soil's really kind of clayish.
We'll get there. Okay, so if you got clay soil, now at my last house I had soil that was purposefully packed clay. So a friend of mine was a geologist in my neighborhood. He says, don't try to dig a hole in your backyard. We packed that with my front yard sand. Backyard, they packed with 2 foot of clay because I'm next to a 10-foot drop off. And he says, we do not want this soil to absorb water so that it potentially can slide in the future. So they just packed it with solid clay. So we tried digging it, shovel through just bouncing, this terrible soil. So what we ended up doing was we brought in 2 pickup loads and about 1 cubic yard of this sandy loam dirt and made a little hill. So we had the avocado, say like this. It might have been underground maybe an inch or so. We managed to make an inch deep cut. And then we just surrounded it with dirt, with sandy dirt. The tree was here. So we essentially just built up a mound around it. Now this sandy loam, we were surprised we didn't cover for a while. Sprinklers hit it, hose hit it, it doesn't move. When the soil's real sandy, it's like on a beach. You try to move the sand with a hose on the beach, it doesn't move too well. Sand is so heavy, if it was clay, the clay just runs right off. But sandy loam, or the soil we got from which was quite grainy, that hill did not move. So we're quite pleased with that. We covered with mulch later. So you made a nice big hill, made it slant toward the root ball, made sure the root ball didn't get covered with dirt. and water it that way. Now I put a drip right on right away, so I didn't really need to slant this. I can just put the dripper right there and it'll just drip straight down.
How deep is the house?
This was as high as the root ball. So it was about 10 inches, 12 inches high. And about, now Brokaw says you make this mound 3 foot wide. I made mine 8 foot wide. With 1 cubic yard of soil, I made it 8 foot across. Actually, what I did is I had enough room to plant 3 avocados on it. So, but that's essentially what we did. We couldn't dig in that yard. Now, at the edge of my yard, right where the slope was, I managed to dig a hole. Well, there was a 10-foot drop off. So I planted an avocado within 3 foot of that edge. Even though it was solid clay there, that tree is the one that grew 5 feet the first year in that solid clay. But it had, you know, it was well drained clay because it was right at the 3 feet from the edge of this 10-foot drop off. So they say the hills back here are the avocado belt of California. Well, in Orange County, most of our hills are sandy clay. They're well drained clay. And it's still where they grow avocados because they've got this good drainage. Now, if you go to Ballbrook, where they have a lot of avocados there, it's well drained, decomposed granite. It's really coarse soil. They really like that too. You know, they'll grow in either one as long as the water doesn't sit there for a week. You're in good shape. But again, I think drainage is overrated because all the avocado sold orchards have compost on them. Even Brokaw does it. I might have to, you know, I don't know if I want to talk to them about it or not. I don't want them to get mad at me. But there's quite a bit of, and it seems to be getting more recently, quite a bit of wood product in there now. More than used to be when we first got it, it was almost pure sandy loam. And then they started changing slowly, putting some strips of cedar in there. And now it's like they're putting pieces of smaller pieces of wood which decompose faster and cause more trouble. The fact that they use rot resistant leaf stalks helps. The fact that they've got a slender root ball also helps. So when you have compost in a pile, the bigger this pile is, the less oxygen makes it to the center. So if it's only if it's only 4 inches wide, we don't consider that a problem at all. If we sell blueberries in pure compost, but the root ball is only 4 inches wide, it seems that at that size, you're not going to get root rot because the air can make it to the center of that 4 inches of compost. Whereas if you got, say, 10 inches of compost in a 5-gallon bucket, those blueberries and that stuff don't make it. That's just too far for the oxygen to try to get through that compost. This is 6 or 7 inches across, not too bad. Still, when I work with these nowadays, I usually get my chopstick out and start poking a bit of that stuff off of there. I'm not real happy with that, the compost on the roots. If you get one from us, you don't have to worry about the soil at all. It's fine the way it is. Now, we don't worry much about circling roots ourselves on these trees because generally they won't grow big enough to cause trouble if they fall over in the wind. Like if you're growing a eucalyptus tree, you do not want the roots to circle. If that tree falls over, it's going to kill somebody. But an avocado tree, especially the ones we're selling, they just don't get big enough. It's not as much of an issue, so we don't worry about the circling roots. Yes.
In the broadcast on the top there, what is that white like place on the top?
They put gypsum.
The gypsum?
They put gypsum. So what Brokaw says, when you make these mounds, you cap it with gypsum, just pure gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. They're saying 15 to 35 pounds on top of the mound. So gypsum does a couple things. Gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, supplies calcium to the tree, which is essential for creating the wood of the tree, also for finishing the fruits. But it also, for some reason, helps prevent certain types of root rot. I think it's phytophthora root rot on avocados. It helps prevent that, and then it also makes water penetrate soil quicker and helps get rid of salts. So there's a lot of good things that gypsum does. I've never added 35 pounds of gypsum on one tree, though. It's like that seems like so much, but that's what their website. You look at their website, and they have things of how they promote I'd suggest that farmers plant the trees. I would say maybe 5 pounds like this. I might do that, but
Would that be under the mulch or above it?
well, they said cap the soil ball. I'm not sure. They don't usually tell the farmers to put mulch down immediately, but they say wait a few weeks then mulch it. So I'm sure this is right on top of it. Or gypsum eventually dissolves and passes through the soil, and then you do it again. So yeah, so after you get established, then you cover everything in a deep layer of mulch. A friend of mine went down to Guatemala to find a wild avocado tree, and they said they dug through 5 foot of dead leaves on top of the ground. So they like that layer of dead leaves down there. So trees, when they drop their leaves, generally they get the nutrients returned to them. And some of the research done shows that it can return to the same tree in as little as 90 days. So when they're dropping the leaves, they don't want you to take those leaves away. They drop them to recycle them, not for the gardener to take them away and give them to someone else. So
How often do you
gypsum, they don't. Generally, it's nice to do it every year, but I don't know that there's any rules. I haven't seen the research on. If you do it this often, you get this result. If you do it this often, you get that result. I haven't seen the research on that, so I don't know if it makes sense to keep doing it. If you've got perfect conditions already, why do too much of it? We do have calcium in the soil, decent amount of calcium in the soil here. Then water wise, go ahead.
You gather the leaves and put them into the recess?
Yeah, I would try to keep the leaves close to the tree. Yeah. And water wise, now Brokaw recommends watering 2 or 3 times a week. I would say with our trees, daily irrigation. So in all the orchards I've walked through, I walk through an avocado orchard almost every day, and they water at least 6 days. So in agriculture research, all the research that's been done the last 20, 30 years has shown that daily light irrigation is more effective and efficient than weekly deep irrigation. If you water once a week deeply, you're too wet for 3 days, you're too dry for 3 days, you're good in the middle of the week. Whereas if you water every day, they said the goal is try to keep the moisture level as even as you can. As even, and the amount of moisture you want, didn't bring my piece of rebar up here, but farmers would use a piece of rebar, 4 foot long rebar. And it could be a stick this thick or even a thinner one, 1/2 inch thick. Go around the orchards, right where they're watering, they see how far they can penetrate the rebar. If you can go in a foot, foot and a half, between a foot and a half, they were good. That's the root system of an avocado tree, somewhere between 12 and 16 inches deep. And you want to keep that entire root system moist all times. If you can only push it down 6 inches, your tree is thinking it's drying up. So it's going to board its flowers and fruit and shut down. Whereas if you want to maintain it at least 1 foot deep at all times. So that's the only way you can check it. You go, okay, I'm watering it 5 minutes every day. Oh, I'm only at 8 inches. We got to maybe water 6 minutes every day. See if I can get it back down to a foot deep. Try to maintain it at a foot at all times. I mean, avocados are always, once they start production, they're producing something all year. Most avocado trees, they always have the crops on them for at least a year, and then they'll be blooming again, making new crops. So they're always in production mode. Although the most important times for water is right when they bloom for about a month after they finish blooming and when they're sizing up, which is like 2 or 3 months before they ripen. Those are the 2 most important watering times. They said mid to late summer, not for the current crop on the tree that's if it bloomed in spring and the fruit's hanging on there summertime. Well, summertime though, you get a lot of fruit drop. I'd hate to back off in the water at that time. So generally, whatever's on the tree by fall from the spring bloom is going to make it to full harvest. they lose about half, sometimes half of the things that are hanging on here in the beginning of summer fall off during the summer. It's just the way it is. They said a lot of the fruit that they pick up off the ground, they notice there's no seed in there, so the flower wasn't fully pollinated properly. So it started making a fruit that was no seed, so it aborted the fruit. But a lot of it does have seeds in it. That's just the way it is. They're not all going to make it to the end. Okay, so gallon. See, they're saying about 2 to 4 gallons a week, so which is close to a gallon a day. A little less than a gallon a day for the first year. Second year, you're talking maybe 4 times that much. Third year, 4 times that much. So as they get bigger, you have to water a lot more to keep them going. Fertilizer wise, when they're young, you just keep fertilizing. Make sure that they're well fed for the first year and a half or till, figure when they're about 6 or 7 foot by 6 or 7 foot wide. They're pretty mature. You can make a pretty big crop at that time. Then you start backing off on the fertilizer. Mature avocado trees don't need that much food as long as you leave their dead leaves underneath them. They said on a mature tree, the only months they want you to fertilize, if you still want your tree to grow or to stay healthy, if the leaf is green all the way through. So you can see this tree here and this tree here, the veins aren't that prominent. They're not very yellow. So this tree is well fed. This tree, the veins are starting to get a little bit yellow. That means they need more nitrogen. So you can keep an eye on your tree. If the leaf starts turning really yellow or pale in general, that's more nitrogen you need. They said June, which is a couple months after the bloom's over, and November, a couple months before the bloom is created, are the best months to fertilize a Hass tree. They've only done a lot of the research on Hass because that's the main commercial tree. It's the ones they're always trying to increase production on. A lot of these other trees we're selling, you don't have to worry about production. They're really heavy producers. So
Does chemical fertilizer versus organic fertilizer, does that make a big difference?
yes and no. So in the short term, no. In the long run, your soil is healthier if you use organics. You can always do it chemically because most orchards are still 100% chemical and they still get crops. But the organics is much easier for a homeowner to handle. So there's 12 or 13 minerals we have to apply to any plant. It's real hard to tell which one it is. If you use an organic fertilizer like Dr. Earth or Down Earth, all 12 are there. If you use a chemical fertilizer, usually not. Like in orchards, they use a lot of ammonium nitrate, which is this nitrogen. Well, they may then lack phosphorus or potassium or, the other 8 minerals, and a homeowner wouldn't know. They have to send their leaves to a plant lab, and the lab tells them, okay, this is what you need to do. Whereas for a homeowner, that's a pain in the rear. So organic fertilizers tend to be more expensive than chemical fertilizers, but much easier to handle. So most orchards do not use organics for the cost, but homeowners, yeah, better use organics since you're not about to go and take your leaves to the plant lab and get them analyzed. So because you look at a leaf and you go, okay, I think that's magnesium, I think that's zinc. It's really hard to tell.
But I mean, if your tree has real big leaves, and they're always growing, then
Yeah, you're in good shape.
Then you really don't have anything to worry about. You're doing it right.
Right. Generally, if the leaves look good, the leaves kind of give you the indication of what you need.
So for this one, it's new. So how often do you need to fertilize when you put?
Well, we fertilized them 4 months ago when we planted them, and so when we grow these things, we do two things just to make it easier for us. When we put them in the pot, we put in our top pot potting soil, then we put in both the Dr. Earth and the Avocados. I do both of these, about an ounce of both of these. And the reason for that, this is a chemical fertilizer. It works today and will work for 6 months. Whereas the organic fertilizer can take 2 to 4 weeks to kick in because something's got to eat this and spit it out and poop it out before the plant can get it. So this has to be broken down by some other organisms that are not in the soil yet. But Dr. Earth, what they do is they add all the organisms that do that work. So this has a list of all the bacteria it puts in here, all the fungi it puts in here. They'll eat this product up, spit it out, and give it to that tree. So we want to introduce this fungus to our top potting soil because it's not in there. And we don't know if Brokaw did it in their little pots with peat. They use peat moss and perlite in those little pots, which to us is perfect. About 80% peat, 20% perlite in those tiny little pots. We don't know if they've added the fungi and the bacteria, so we do it to make sure it's there. If you put a tree in the ground, they're there. You don't have to worry about that. But if you put them in a pot, you don't know, but we already added it. So all of our trees we're selling, this is already there. You don't need to add more of it. You know, Consumer Reports ran an article in the 90s saying that this was all snake oil, but in certain conditions, situations, it's useful, you know, in an artificial potting soil. It's definitely useful. So,
And when you foliar feed, using molasses.
we'll talk about that later. Right?
Okay.
That's not the main thing we're doing. So we start them that way. When you put them in the ground, you can certainly go organic. Now, most organic fertilizers are roughly, if you look at the instructions, it's roughly 1 cup of this per inch of trunk diameter every month or 2 or 3. If your plant looks like it's going to town, you can just watch grow for a while. Some farms use chicken manure. There are some farms that do that.
To do that once a month,
You can do it well. If it's organic, you can't hurt it by overdoing it. You just waste money.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do this as often as like. You can put like 10 pounds of this on there. It's not going to hurt it. You're just wasting money. So I remember when I was a kid, I had no clue about fertilizer. I thought if this teaspoon works, I'll put like 2 handfuls on this 1 gallon plant. And what I got is a whole bunch of maggots. So, but the plant was fine. It didn't bother the plant. The organic fertilizers just don't burn anything like the chemicals do. Generally, with fertilizers, they say you can, with any fertilizer, especially the chemical ones, you can put down 5 times too much if we're going to cause damage to the plant. Okay, so water kind of daily. Now, this, the Brokaw root ball, there's so much actual dirt in here. This takes about at least 2 days to dry out. So you can go every couple of days on a Brokaw tree. It stays wet for a long time. Our stuff tends to dry out within a day and a half or so. So we'd rather see it watered every day. But again, I've watered these every day too on my drip system, and no problem as long as you don't have any compost in the hole with them. So, okay, I think we covered most of the planting. Yes.
See, organic fertilizer, they've been using it, scooping the mulch away, putting it in my house, mixing it with dirt, and they ended up mixing it out. But there's some local animals that go there and want it, right? Do you recommend something like adding chili powder or something to stir?
Well, chili, yeah, if you have some raccoon or skunk or something digging up your organic stuff, yeah, especially raccoons, I'm thinking chili will really mess up their nose because they find everything by smell. So that would probably be good. Or a dog. The dogs like to dig up this stuff too. Yeah, their sense of smell is really good. So
Might be a suggestion. I haven't tried it yet.
so some of these fertilizers, they say mix in the dirt. We'll always like to put them. The guys at the soil and plant lab told me just throw it next to the trunk. They said we don't know where the roots are. You throw it next to the trunk, the plant's going to get. We like to leave it on the top of the ground as long as it's getting moist from the irrigation. It'll work. If you bury it, sometimes if there's not enough air there, it doesn't work properly. Things can go, what do you call it, septic if they're buried. If they're on the surface, they don't do that. So it's better to we think it's better to keep them on the surface of the soil, underneath the dead leaves if possible, although when you water it, you can certainly filter through the dead leaves.
They say that when you water, you have to water at a drip line.
Now with avocados, we like to keep most of the drip line area wet. And with most fruit trees, they're starting to do that too. They don't want to just water one spot because you want the roots to spread out. So most of the avocado orchards I've walked through, they use micro sprinklers. So they have sprinklers at the base of the trunk shooting in all directions. So they cover about a 10-foot wide, micro sprinklers cover about a 10-foot wide area. And they'll have one or two underneath the tree, so it covers an area maybe 12 foot across.
I water hose them. What I you water? You use the hose.
Oh, it's fine as long as you're consistent. I mean, I had one person say, well, my orange tree, one week I'll water this side, another week I'll water over here, another week I'll water over here. You went, well, that tree can't, the roots can't keep up with you because generally plant roots grow where there's consistently moist soil. They don't grow if you just water it once a month. They won't grow there. So try to keep whatever you're doing consistent. Okay, pollination. So California is probably the only place where the academia still say you need, the instructions say you need an A and a B type. Nowhere else in the world do they actually do that. So what that means is that so there's two styles of blooming, type A and type B. And what's going on is that, and most of the famous avocados happen to be type A. So in the mornings, you look at the little flowers. Now yeah. So if you look at this flower right now, petals are open, but all you see is the female stigma in the middle. So this is that female stage right now. That's AM. And then PM, what'll happen, the same flower, the female part's still there, but the male anthers are now raised up and they're releasing their pollen. But usually by that time, when the pollen's ready, the female part's dried up, won't accept any pollen. So, and then on the B-type avocados, what they're doing is their flowers open up in the afternoon as a female, and then the next morning they do their male thing. So the claim is if you have a B-type avocado next to an A-type avocado, you'll get better pollination because this pollen is readily available to that one. Now the problem is what the bees do. The bees don't really do too much flying between trees. That's the problem. So so when they've actually done the testing, and we saw the research paper University of California Riverside put out. So they said if you take and they only did the study in half, so that's one of the problems. We have no idea if the other avocado trees need pollination, if they'll improve from pollination. But so they had a plot on a farm with 8 hass trees and 1 Zutano in the middle, which they said was by far the best pollinator that they tried for the hass. The best B type for the hass, which is an A type, is the Zutano. So you put 1 Zutano tree in the middle of 8 other hass trees. They said it's got to be the adjacent tree. And what they result was 11%, the average was 11% increase in production. But if you do the math here, you took out 1 out of every 9 trees to increase by 11%. You took out 12% of your orchard, increase it by 11%. The orchard people tell me, don't do that. That's stupid. So now you've got a whole bunch of Zutanos that you can't sell that you got, and that's why they use them for seeds. No one wants to eat them. So that didn't really, so the University of California came back and said, well, some years it's 15%. Well, if some years 15%, I mean, some years it's not an improvement at all. Your average is your truth. So you could have just put, instead of one hass tree in your yard and one zooton, you could have had two hass trees, had more good hass fruit. So that research is kind of faulty. And we still hear it from everybody. Said, "Oh, don't you need an A type and a B type?" It's like, no. So most orchards don't use that. And what they said is that most branches on an avocado tree aren't in synchrony. So this branch may be A in the morning, female in the morning and male afternoon. And this other branch may be totally off and maybe doing the opposite thing. And they said there's a lot of overlap at noon. So the main thing is keeping the bees. They said the bees are the main thing. In fact, University of Riverside says the bees don't really like the Hass avocado tree. That's one of the problems with Hass, truthfully, is that the bees find the nectar to be kind of bitter. So they said the kiss of death for a Hass avocado orchard be next to an orange orchard. The bees just go over to the orange trees. So it's a bee problem more than it is anything else. So again, if you have only one avocado tree, you'll probably find there'll be some branches that are out of synchrony on it, especially on an older tree, and there'll be a lot of overlap midday. So as long as you get the bees there, you're good. But the bees are the problem. So the University of California researcher said, okay, I bet you that my hass tree can produce a lot more if I do the pollination. So he got a little paintbrush out and pollinated the flowers. He said he got 700 fruit instead of 110, which is normal. He got 700 fruit on his hass. And then so I said, okay, well, that's an option. You want to sit there. And these other guys, I looked on the internet one day and said, no, don't do that. They said, just spray the flowers with honey and water. Let the bees do the work. So we tried that. This was like 5 years ago. I had on my avocados, this was in June. There was only a few flowers left. I was out there at 4 avocado trees. I only saw one fruit blower. I'm going, this is terrible. I don't see any bees at all. Didn't see any of that spraying on my avocado trees. Then I saw this video on YouTube with these two different guys saying, this is how you attract bees. You get honey and water. It's 1/4 honey and 3/4 water in a little spritzer bottle. Use warm water so it dissolves a little better. And spray your flowers once a week. So I had a branch with 10 flowers left. That was all the flowers I had left on my tree. Sprayed it with honey. I saw bees on that branch, and this is interesting. I got 5 avocados on that one branch. And here the rest of the tree had bloomed for months and months and only made one. And here, just getting the bees to that branch, I got 5 avocados in that one branch. So I'm saying that honey works. Get the bees to like your tree better. It becomes a center of attention if you do that. I mean, you don't want, like they always tell you, attract pollinators to your garden. Well, if you have really good attractors, they're not going to your avocado tree. That's the problem, is they're too attractive. But again, the honey solves that. Put honey on your flowers, and suddenly becomes a starter garden. The bees will stay on the tree. You get lots of fruit on it. So don't worry about type A, type B. Spray them with honey. And one of our customers said they went to 1/5 honey. If you want to be a cheapskate, that's fine. 1/5 honey, but it still works.
How much
So-
water?
3/4.
So if you put 2 ounces, then you want 8 ounces, 6 ounces.
6 ounces of water, 2 ounces honey. And you spritz them. You can hit everything. I mean, the bees are attracted by the smell. I mean, apparently they can smell it from a mile away or something, because there's no bee hive supposed to. But when you spray honey on there, you see a lot of bees on it, so they're smelling it. And then they zero in on the color of the flowers have an infrared, ultraviolet striping, so the bees zero in on that and go for the nectar.
I would use a lot less than that, and it's still work that. I'll increase the honey level. I just want to make sure it dissolves so that the sprayer doesn't get clogged up.
Right. Now, hot water does help. Okay, so that's pollination. Yeah. Oh no, I don't think so. They said once a week. It's you can still kind of smell it the second day, so it probably doesn't matter that much. Yes,
The other fermented fruit juice, we're gonna do the same thing as, honey.
I wouldn't try that one. No, fermented fruit juice will probably attract the big beetles and the fruit flies. Now flies may do pollination too. They do say wind can do some pollination on avocados, but apparently it's bees that are the most important. So, and of course, honeybees aren't native to the avocados in down Mexico, so there must be some native bees around too that can also do the work. Okay, so on the little sheet it gave you most of the types, to tell you a type A and B, and truthfully, even in the orchards, most orchards just will buy an A and a B type to mix into their orchard, just in case it helps, just in case it might, you might get a 1 or 2% increase, which for a farmer that might be a big deal.
And surprise, then they might help each other out because that's an A and a B.
Right,
So,
right.
This time you didn't have A or B, you have
It's an A.
a
Okay, so now there's not many pests on avocados. There's one that we get. So there's a few things that eat avocado leaves. None of them are very major. You don't seem to get much damage from grasshoppers and katydids, and occasionally some beetles eat them. There is one nasty bug. I'll mention that too. So the real bad bug out there is polyphagus beetle. It's a weevil, and what it does. So when this beetle arrived in Orange County or in Southern California about 3 years ago, they thought, boy, this is going to wipe out the avocados. So this beetle can feed on a variety of trees, even the native trees it's feeding on, and it bores into the bark of the tree, and it's and to lay eggs, but its larva can't digest wood. So what it does, it's carrying a fungus with it. So the fungus eats the tree, the larvae feed on the fungus. So if this gets into an avocado tree, you'll see a little drill hole, and then the area around it starts to darken as the fungus infects it. The only way you can cure it is to amputate. Now, the one good thing about avocados is that they can recover well from being amputated, because that was the way we used to control height back in the old days. So in the old days, the avocado trees would get 20, 25 foot, can't pick them anymore. So they would take a chainsaw to them in the middle of winter and chop them down to 4 feet. So I tried that. I had to do that. I had to see what happened. So I had an avocado that was about 18 foot tall. I got my chainsaw. The trunk was about that big in diameter. Cut it off at 4 feet, like they said. Nothing happened for 3 months, and then it just took off. It grew back 6, 7 foot the rest of the year. Bloomed the next year, had a crop. So I didn't lose much time on that. It was so strong. But lost that year. Well, actually, we picked the fruit that winter before we cut it off. So we didn't. Well, we lost 1 year's crop, but not much more than that. And it grew back and stayed eager to pick for a number of years. So that's one way you control the height. Otherwise, you can prune them lightly every year. Now, anyway, this bug apparently is not a problem with the avocado orchards. They said the thing that keeps them out of the tree is this good sap flow. So as long as you water your tree adequately, the bug can't get in there, because every time it makes a hole, the sap just pours out, can't get in. I've seen some really abandoned avocado. Well, I went to a yard a couple years ago in Tustin, and they didn't water their backyard. And their avocado tree had all these black blotches all over the trunks. They said, okay, you got the beetle and the fungus in there, amputate right here to save your tree. I don't know if they actually did that or not, but it was looking pretty poorly because they weren't watering adequately, so that beetle was getting in. But the beetle's been attacking a lot of the native oaks, a lot of the native sycamore trees and parks around here, because during the last drought it was real bad. Now, the other bug that came into California, this was around 1998 or so, they got this persamite. So on the now on the bottom of this leaf, you see these silvery spots. You can see it on the top side too, but the bug is actually on the bottom of the leaf, and it makes these little silvery patches, maybe less than a quarter-inch across, a little more than an eighth inch across, but less than. And they're little silvery patches. Those little silvery patches are actually little spider webs. And under each spider web is a colony of little spider mites called Persea mites. And they came up from Mexico 1990s, and they're causing the trees to foliate. We found if we sprayed them with a horticultural oil like this, neem oil can work too, but this one is cheaper and we think it's better. All seasons horticultural oil, you'll clean them up in one shot. Every time we just sprayed them real good, that was it. Now, most orchards don't treat for this bug anymore because what they did is they found the predatory mite that eats this mite. Now you can tell predatory mites from these mites because these mites are really slow moving. The predator mites are like little lions and tigers. They're running around the leaf consuming the other mites. So they said in orchards, what's going on is, and even in the neighborhoods around here, about every 2 or 3 years, you get a wave of Persea mites going through the neighborhood. And then you get a wave of predator mites following behind them, a few weeks behind them. And it never gets real bad anymore. When it got bad, the tree would defoliate. Of course, defoliation controls the mites, and then they would grow back, but you lose about a year of crop. Nowadays, it never gets that bad because the predator mites are out there also. So you can just keep an eye on it. If you just see a few spots, not a big deal. If you want to control it, the oil is what you use. The other thing that happens to avocados is sunburning. Now, if the tree is real healthy, it takes a pretty good heat spell to sunburn it. We used to buy the trees from the other retail nursery, wholesale growers, and they would always sunburn right when it broke 95 degrees. Then we started carrying brocaws. We never saw them burn. So, okay, brocaws are immune until 2010, 112 degrees. We saw them burn. I go, okay, if it breaks 100, we got to whitewash the brocaw trees too. But when they're unhealthy, the sap flow isn't good enough to keep them cool. So, like this tree, showing all kinds of sunburn. You can see the bottom of this branch is green. When the sun hit it, it's brown. And when it's really bad sunburn, it cuts off the circulation of that branch. So the tree has to grow a new branch from an part that's not been sunburned and replace that part. And that's one of the reasons brocaw covers this area of the tree with this cardboard. In case the grower doesn't whitewash it and it gets extremely hot and they lose the entire top, it will regrow from above the graft. So they put this on there protecting that. It also helps protect from frost in the colder areas too. They do that. Otherwise, here we see we did actually whitewash this thing, but it apparently wasn't good enough. So the whitewash, you can just go to a hardware store and buy white latex paint, kind of half water, and use that. If you want to do what the orchards do, they use this stuff made out of silica gel, which is quartz. Same thing as quartz. So it's diatomaceous earth or silica gel, and they mix it with milk to make it stick better. And you can either buy white or green if you'd rather have green, or gray, and they also have a brown if you want to match the color of your trim better. And
How far up the tree?
well, so you try not to whitewash the leaves because the leaves don't really burn that easily. But any stem that the sun can touch is vulnerable. Now, again, the lower part of the tree is the most important part. You don't want your trunk and main branches to sunburn, and they can sunburn all their life, essentially. So you want to, whatever the sun can touch. Now, if the tree is real nicely leafed out, like this one, there's barely a spot on this tree where the sun can really touch it. There's not much it's almost running like a ceiling where the symmetry is really nice. So you may not need to whitewash that, but like this branch sticking out there, this bare trunk here is vulnerable. Now this stuff we sell, which is quite expensive in the small amounts that you buy it in, commercially they'd buy a drum of this stuff. Here they sell you a little pouch full of it, and you can mix it all with this amount of water and do about 5 good-sized trees. Or all we did. I did my daughter's tree and a couple other ones in boxes. We used about quarter of this and just put it some water in a party glass, put it in there, stirred it up, and painted the parts of the tree that the sun can touch. They have a spray on one too, but I don't think it covers as far as doing it yourself with the powder stuff. A lot of times in orchards, if the tree, if the orchard gets a bad frost and they lose their leaves, they'll just fly wash it by airplane. Just fly over and crop dust it with the stuff. Okay, so that's sunburn. I think we covered most of culture. Well, okay. So size and shape. So what they found with any fruit tree that we know of is that you get maximum production per square foot if your tree is only about 5 foot wide and maybe 8 foot tall. So the sunlight can only penetrate the tree 30 inches through the foliage. So if you have a tree that's much larger than that, wider than that, taller than that, you got a big dark area that does not produce fruit. And one of the problems we have with avocados is the size of the fruit. We have a branch out here in the sunlight, getting plenty of sun, make some flowers, get a fruit forming on that branch, and that fruit can weigh over a pound. The branch just does this. So the fruit's hanging straight down in the shade now. This branch will never fruit again. Tree's got to grow a new branch out to the sunlight, and it flowers and fruits, and then it does the same thing. So the University of California just started a research project this year where they're spelling the branches, holding the branches in place. Now I've seen this, what happens when this happens. So and I saw this twice in 1 year where at the Great Park, we planted one of these Carmens there 13 years ago, 2008, somewhere around there, 14 years ago. And this tree was about 8 foot by foot, but there was one branch that was about a foot off the ground, coming out about 5 feet. There's 50 avocados hanging on this branch. We couldn't believe it. There were more fruit on that one branch than the whole rest of the trees. Well, the reason for that now, looking back at it, this branch couldn't dive into the shade because the fruit was touching the ground. The fruit was holding it above the ground. It was just flat out straight. It just loaded up with fruit. And then I went to a customer's house that same year. They had a hash tree. Same thing, a branch on the ground, totally loaded in fruit. Just holding that branch in the sunlight, that thing becomes incredibly productive. Now in Japan, because they grow them in little Quonset huts, because they can't grow them outdoors in the winter, they would have them in big tubs, and they would just grow 2 branches on their hash trees up at a slight angle. And they would line up their tubs in this greenhouse, so it would be V after wide V after wide V, and you'd see the fruit hanging on the branches like that. So there's something, they'd support them with wires. So there's something to that. You might try growing your avocado on a fence. See what happens. I mean, apples have been, they've been doing apples for a long time now, and of course, apples have the same problem. The fruit is so heavy that it can weigh the branches down so they can't stay productive. They're just not in the sun anymore. So this flat branches may have something to it.
Does that because more photosynthesis, right?
Right. Yeah. When it's hanging straight down, it isn't getting any light anymore. So
Very good touching and grass. Yes.
well, you got critters. Yeah, you don't want ants in your tree, and you don't want snails in your tree, so that can be a problem. I mean, you can put each fruit into a white styrofoam cup. I don't think most critters know what that is. Anyway, so you can grow it as the trunk straight up and then have the branches supported somehow and see if you get better production that way. Or just keep the tree small enough so that there's no way it can dive into the shade. So.
And then when you're shaping on the interior, just make sure that it's got good air circulation It's not crossing branches, not just,
I don't think the branch structure is very important. I mean, you know, if you have a choice, yeah, it's more efficient if all branches are very radially out in the middle, nothing crossing through. But as long as they get the light penetration there, we should be fine no matter what, how the branches are arranged. You know, certainly you want more branching and more horizontal branching. And again, you know, if you have a tree like this, yeah, this is an ideal branch to try that supporting horizontally with. You'll have to watch the sun burning on a flat branch because there's no coverage on this branch at this time. So whitewash is good. I had a tree once, this was back in the 1980s, good sized branch, at least this thick going horizontal. We had 103 degrees. You know, I didn't have broke off trees in those days. That thing 2 days later just broke off, right? It burnt right there, broke off. Right where it burned. Couldn't believe it. That showed me how sensitive they are to burning because it actually broke at the burn point.
I have a surprise tree and it had about 3 branches growing like that. What I did is I tied it up and that's gonna keep it from fruiting, but it'll grow a lot this year and then I can let those branches come out
Well,
and
it
then
is
support
true.
them.
Yeah, it's true. If the branch is totally horizontal, it stops growing. If it's slightly vertical at the end, it continues to grow. So when they make espalier trees, they usually keep the branch pointed upwards at the end and lay it down as it grows because it won't grow any more length if it's totally horizontal or pointing down. It stops growing. That's a good note. Yeah, you want to grow a long branch, you have to keep the end pointed upwards. That's why in Japan they elevate them slightly so they keep growing.
Okay. The way to do it is like a pollinator spreading avocado.
Don't know.
Goes on the ground.
Yeah, so we're you know, University of California right now is doing the research. They want to figure out which avocados are best for espaliering. So you know, we can find out too uh, which ones we like. Yeah,
So the thing we can put it on and prevent it.
yeah, and now when we had 115, what was that? 3 years ago now, 115 in July, 3 years ago. We lost the top, all the new growth in all our avocado trees that year. There's just no way that, you know, being from Guatemala, they seem to like it a lot between 90 and 110. That range of temperatures seems to be really good for avocado growth. You break 110. So my daughter was out there that day and watering the trees. She was sprinkling tops. She says, I can't do anything about it. The tops are just turning black before my eyes. So all the new growth burnt off. The old mature leaves were fine in the 115 degrees, but we lost about a foot and a half of all our avocados at this size. But the remainder of summer stayed right around 100. Boy, they grew back so fast. It was just crazy. They love 100 degrees. So, but yeah, not much more than 110. Okay. Now, most of the varieties that we sell are better, much better producers than Hass. Now, the list you have is a list of everything that Brokaw grows. They grow a few more too. You know, they grow Hass, and we don't care for that one. They have another version of Hass, which we don't want to get either. And they do Sultana, which we don't bother getting. Um, and maybe one or two others, but this is generally what we can order from them. We couldn't get Queen or Nabal this year, so those two are not available. But all the rest we have. Now, the only one that we can't get from Brokaw we'd like to get is everybody keeps asking us for Jan Voice. So there is an avocado called Jan Voice, which originated in Florida. I don't know if they have some patent things going on with it that they can't sell it or whatnot. We don't know what's going on with them. So they don't grow Jan Boys. Jan Boys, University of California says, is the best tasting avocado at their ranch, but in Irvine. However, we've eaten that one. We've eaten the top 10 essentially. Not a huge difference. If you're not all eating them all together, you won't notice the difference. So all the ones we have are awful good. Even bacon, where they just say it's good, um, you let that ripen on the tree, it's pretty darn good. I like the bacon myself. And one of the few avocados you can pick in January. So there's so Jan Boys you can't get. You got bacon. So bacon, I'll put these together. Bacon and Stewart are the most Mexican of the avocados we have. Stewart actually has a fruit that looks like the traditional Mexican fruit, real thin, purple or almost black skin on it that you can't peel. You just kind of eat it with the flesh. Bacon is a little more of the normal green skin. This one's yellow, greenish yellow meat. This one is green, kind of greenish meat too. And that one, Stewart's real nutty flavored, a little different. Bacon, to me, if I let it ripen on the tree, ripen until it drops off in your hand, I swear it tastes a little like bacon, even though it's named after Jim Bacon, the owner of the ranch. But to me, it actually has a little bit of that bacon flavor in it. So I do like the bacon. So bacon is unique for its season of fruiting. In fact, the Stewart is too, October to January. This one, I would say January to March. The original books have said that bacon you can start picking in November. It's lousy in November. You have to wait till January till it starts getting really good. Stewart, the true Mexican, there's one out there called Mexicola. Yeah, it's November, seems to be November, December seems to be its prime months. And both of these are B types. Just in case. Now, also the thing about bacon Stewart, they're the most cold hardy of all the avocados, and that's because they're true Mexican. So if you want to grow an avocado in San Francisco, good luck. But these would be the types that you would try to grow. When we had 23 degrees in 1990, San Francisco hit 13. That was crazy. Yeah. Okay, so those are the true Mexican types. Now the Guatemalan types, which are the most cold sensitive, would be things like now the ball, which we don't have this year in Reed, certainly are true Guatemalan. The fruit are both shaped almost perfectly round, and they both ripen late. Reed is one of our best sellers because it is a very heavy producer. The ball is super heavy producer too, but it does the alternate bearing. And so what alternate bearing means is that one year it'll make nothing. But because it makes nothing, the next year it will make 200, 300 avocados. It got so much energy from having an off year, it does that. And then the next year it's so tired it can't make a single one again. So it goes through that pattern. One of our customers who brings us in the ball fruits to eat says this tree has never been able to produce every year. It's always an alternate bearer. But we rate Reed as one of the best we've eaten. When we eat in ball, you go, okay, this may be even better. It's just not as consistent as Reed. So those are both good Guatemalan types. I mean, Holiday may be similar too because it's also round. So Holiday has the distinction of being the smallest avocado tree known. Fruit shape is about like this. Close to being round, but not a little bit longer. And it's July, let's see, June through December. So it's supposed to cover most of the major holidays. Um, Now, these are on the tree for a year and 4 months before you start picking. So they're on the tree a long time. Um, a lot of people started picking reeds by mistake in the fall because they're already pretty big, and they're never gonna. You pick an avocado too early, it just turns into rubber. It stays rubbery all, it's ripe, but it's rubber, so it's no good. So like reed, the first time I had reed, I said, okay, let's see exactly when you can eat this. So I ate one in January. It was okay. By April, they were really good. I was thinking, God, it can't be much better than this. So when I had a reed tree, I finished the whole tree by before July. And here the grower, they say, oh, don't start picking till July. Well, to me, they were good enough. So a lot of these trees, you can pick them somewhat early. But these are a lot of the late ones. Now, the Hass avocado has a lot of relatives. The store, supposedly you're buying Hass, but it can be any one of a bunch of trees now. So Hass was the original. And Carmen is the mutant up to 4 times your bloomer form of Hass. And then there's Gwen, which so we don't get. Jim we carried earlier this year. And there's Lamb. I think there's Lamb Hass. There's Surprise. There's 2 B types in there, the rest are A types. A lot of the orchards now are planting these 2, Surprise and Gem. So all these are much higher producers than the original Hass. They're all sold at the supermarket as Hass, so that's why you look at the avocados at the supermarket. They don't look all identical. In fact, Carmen can make fruit that look totally different at its different bloom periods. So it turns out that the bloom time and the temperature of bloom time may have a lot of influence on the shape of the fruit. So the colder is when the avocados bloom, generally the longer necks the avocados have. And the warmer it is when they bloom, the rounder the fruit is. So reed is they blooms until summer, the fruit is almost perfectly round. When Carmen blooms in summer, it makes round fruit. When it blooms in spring, it makes pear-shaped fruit. So you can kind of tell which crop is which by the size and the shape of the fruit. You can also tell because when fruit starts to ripen, well, when it's ready to fall off the tree, the stem that attaches to the fruit turns yellow right there. So when it turns yellow, you can usually turn the fruit sideways and it just pops right off at that point.
So for common, that's how you know because it's year round. So
Right. It's hard to tell. Yeah, it is really hard to tell when avocados are ripe. It's all a timing thing. And again, you can be off by quite a bit and stuff. Fruit's still pretty good. So, but these are all, so Hass was the parent. Gwen and Witzel were the granddaughters of Hass. These aren't grown anymore in orchards because they produce too much for their own good. Their parent was, they one in between, I think it was called Theo, and it would just fruit and break in half all the time. Gwen and Witzel tend to be just as bad. We've had someone just tell me their Witzel just broke this year. It was just too loaded. So they overproduce, which is a nice problem to have. If you're aware of it, you can always prevent it from breaking. In an orchard situation, they couldn't deal with it. It was just too productive. So Jem is a daughter of Gwen. Lamb is a daughter of Gwen. These are both more reasonably productive trees. So Jem and Lamb are 2 of your top selling avocados in orchards right now. Lamb, when we got our lambs in, like this lamb here, we got in about 50 or 60 lambs. 20 of them have fruit on them already. We couldn't believe it. This size, 20 had fruit. They're so precocious. Okay, we'll just close our eyes and break it off. We don't want to promote fruit on a tree that's a foot tall. There's just nothing you can do with that. It'll just stay a foot tall all year and grow 1 fruit. So there's no use doing it. But we couldn't believe how many fruit came on the lambs. They're so precocious. So Lamb and Jim both, which are siblings, super productive. Surprise is one of the other B type avocados that you can go along with Jim. It's a little bit earlier ripener than Jim is, and the skin is thinner. It's got more Mexican in it than the original Hass. Hass is mostly Mexican, a little Guatemalan, but Surprise getting very close to pure Mexican, but still it's sold at the stores as a Hass. So if you find a avocado at the store in the spring that's got really thin skin comparatively, you've got a lot of Surprise. Lamb is nice because it ripens way later than the rest of the Hass family. It ripens July through June through December. So, when you give them that range, you can pick it in June, you can leave it on the tree till December. It will hang that long. So that's actually not a bad combination. Those two, or any of these. Actually, the Carmen's nice. If you only want one tree, Carmen's hard to beat, but it's nice to have a bunch of avocados. Now that we know, you keep them about 5 foot wide, they'll produce a good amount of fruit. We just sold one of our big avocados that was in a 24-inch box, so essentially 2 years older than these. It had looked like about 100 fruit on it. So that's its second year second year we've had it. It's like 2.5 years old. Well, right now it's 3 years old because I think the seed was planted 3 years ago now, and the tree was this wide, about 7 foot tall, and we had eaten 4 off of it earlier this year, and it had a good 100 on it when we delivered to the customer's house. I think we lost 2 on the way.
What
The
was
fruit it was an edronal. And the fruit were already about that size, about as big as my thumb. So they looked like they were going to hold, but we lost a couple on the way.
it was almost ideal size.
Yeah. It's a nice sized tree. I mean, it could fill in a little more because it was still some branched areas that were only this wide, but it had a few branches that were like this. So that was a nice looking tree.
What kind?
Edronal. Yeah, we don't know the history on edronal that much. So anyway, these are all the past offspring, and most of them, like most Carmens you look at, one at Great Park is hanging in around 10 foot by 10 foot. My daughter's mother-in-law's in-laws house has a Carmen. Theirs is about 8 foot by 10 foot. The Gwyn's and Whistles tend to be real small gems. The book says that they're narrow, but an orchard I'm at, they look about 8 by 10. After 3 years, we around about 8 by 10. Lamb is short. Surprise is at the orchard I'm at, they haven't done as well. They've been a little smaller tree, maybe this big. But the orchard hadn't planted too close to the eucalyptus, which is not nice to avocado trees. Now another daughter of Cass that's become famous is this Don Gilligan. And on the internet, you look up Don Gilligan, and a lot of people swear it's the best avocado they've eaten. We can't argue with it, although we say, there's plenty of good avocados. But Mr. Don Gilligan lived in La Jolla, and it was 56 years ago. He planted a hasket and got this tree that made fruit that are about that size and shape. Really long. The seed's down here. It's a very unusual tree, and our tree, which is still out there, it's going to my daughter's house in a bit, had 20 on it its first year. So it was the most productive one we had in the nursery that first year. We had a holiday out there, made like 2 the first year. But the Don Billy actually, on its second year of its life, it actually had 20. It had 100 on it to begin with, and most of them dropped off over summer. We ended up with about 20 of them. And during that Thanksgiving windstorm, knocked the tree over, knocked a couple of them off. We ate them Thanksgiving, and they were good, even though the ripening period on Don Billy. Now this has a double bloom, so it's March and August are the 2 crops for Don Gilligan. And that March crop fell off in November, and we ate them, and they were good. They were good in November. And we ate the rest in March and April. And then the customer who had grown Donagilly for 20 years brought us fruit both in March and both in August. So he gets the distinct crops on his. And the original tree down in La Jolla is around 15 foot after 50 years by about 10. So that stayed a decent size too. So we do like the Don Gilby was the fastest sour for it just because the tree out there had fruit on it. That's been a good one.
Here.
It's an A type. When we looked at it, it looked like it was mostly A. So the other types we don't know as much about. Well, Holiday, we already mentioned Holiday as being the one that University of California recommends the most for homeowners. Now, the university didn't know what was going on, so they had licensed it to one of the retail growers. Shouldn't say their name, but most of their trees die when they grow them because they grow them in, well, they use two things, decomposed granite and fir bark fines in their mix, and everything they grow tends to rot. So all the holidays were rotting out, and so University of California actually put a footnote underneath holiday saying, this tree, you might have trouble growing it. Well, no. It's just that when that grower grows it, they all die. So it got a bad reputation for that. Unfortunately, it got a bad reputation because the other nursery was growing it. Once we got our hands on it, we said, okay, this is a great tree. But it is, I didn't bring one in here, but it does have skinnier leaves, smaller leaves. You know, when it starts out, it looks the same as the rest of the tree. But within a few months, you notice that the leaves are a lot smaller, lots thinner, and more densely set on the tree than other avocados. And the University of California says that most of the short trees like Jim, Witzel, Gwen, all those other ones, they're staying short because of production. Just the way the fruit and the amount of energy it takes to make that crop keeps the tree short. They said on Gwen, which was the first quote dwarf that they created back in the 1980s, they said they had suspicions about it. So what they did is they cut off all the flowers for 5 years, and all 5 trees that did that to broke 20 foot. Whereas the rest of the Gwen trees stayed right around 8 foot because of the fruit load. But they said on the holiday, no matter what they did to it, it wouldn't grow tall. It looks like it might be a vine instead of an actual tree. So that might be a real good one to try a spelling with. Plus, it makes these huge fruit. Plus, holiday to me tastes like buttered, salted butter. Because every time I eat that thing, I go, it tastes like salted butter. So quite good.
It looks like a bush. That's why I asked you about the branches being around. That 20% of my branches are on.
Right. It seems to be very viney growth. The other dwarf one that's on the market with works, also the Avocados, we got the same problem. It's very viney branches, so not much trunk strength on it.
You trim them back or just let them grow like they want?
Well, try to grow the branches horizontal. So there's so Edronol is kind of new to us, so that's why we grew that one and had the nice crop this year. That seems to be a very nice one too. The only disadvantage, the book does say it's alternate bearing, tends to alternate bear. Now, what if you have a tree that tends to be an alternate bearer, but it's not, maybe not a true alternate bearer, like persimmon trees do that a lot too. They'll have 500 fruit one year, nothing the next. On the year when you have a lot of fruit forming and they're, say, late spring that year, or not, don't wait till in the summer, but late spring, early summer, when the fruit's about that big, cut off 2/3 of it, so that the tree's not using any energy to make 500 fruit, maybe only 200 fruit, then the next year it may have enough energy to make another crop. We got to do that with our Satsuma mandarin because we do 500 one year, nothing the next, 500, nothing. So one year we cut off 300 of those 500 fruits, and then we kind of leveled the tree out at around 200, 300 fruit a year. Now Esther, we don't know anything about yet, so we're growing that one this year. Now Pinkerton, I grew back in the 80s, but I couldn't get any fruit on it because those are years we're having those really cold winters, and Pinkerton blooms December through February. So I said, this is worthless. But nowadays, it don't matter anymore. We don't get. So, well, we might. You don't know what winter's going to do. But in the late 80s, when I grew Pinkerton, the average nighttime temperature in December was like 35 degrees. We haven't seen that since since the late 80s. Haven't seen that kind of weather. But every night it was frosty. The bees would not come out. I think Pinkerton just sat there, made no like one food because I hand pollinated it. But that's all I got. Pinkerton is that very unusual long shape, also very large, very good fruit though. I would say it rivals Don Gilgley in flavor, and it also ripens early, from January through June. They kind of ripen, about a year after they bloom. So Pinkerton blooms real early too. Queen, we don't know much about. Queen, I've got one at our growing room. I want to see how big the fruit is. The fruit's on that one's so confused, but it's a tall tree too. So like a 2-pound fruit. Hopefully we'll have queen next year. Charwell is rated the top fruit we can grow. And the unusual thing about that is that mature fruit can hang on the tree for 11 months. So essentially, that one crop will cover the entire year if you can keep the raccoons and things off the tree. Charwell, real small tree. I mean, the customer was asking me why is Charwell after 4 years is still only 2 foot tall. And I have the same problem in my house. I have a Charwell that I've had for 3 years. It's like this tall, it's like 8 foot wide and this tall. It's got fruit on it. It won't grow a branch straight up. There's something with that Charwell. I think that's the batch we got that was on clonal roots. There's something about the clonal roots that was stunting it. If the Charwells we have out there look normal. And this is also a B type, but yeah. So that is among the trees we have the one that University of California rates as the top flavored one. So that's also the one we get. Any other questions? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't have it on the shelf today, but there is a product called so the University of California sent letters to everybody in the late 90s or late 80s, I can't remember when it was, saying that this product did a miracle on avocado trees. They can take an avocado with maybe 20 leaves left on the whole tree, or maybe 10% of its leaves left, and it's dying from root rot. They would inject this product in the trunk, and the tree would come back to life. It's mono and dipotassium called phosphoric acid. Something like that. I don't have a bottle on me right now, so I can't give you the exact. But essentially, that's a fertilizer. And in many states, in the United States, it's listed as a fertilizer. Apparently, putting more phosphorus into the plant system. Phosphorus is an energy source for the plant. It's how plants transmit energy around their system. You get that into the plant, it seems to be able to cure its own root rot problems. They said they were able to save avocado trees from imminent death by injecting this into their trunks. Now, again, so they say a lot of the orchards will put this because if you buy in big quantities, it's relatively cheap, and put into their irrigation system to keep their trees from getting a root. Now, again, I don't think if you buy trees from us that root rot is going to be a major factor in your garden. But orchards, because they're not getting trees from us, then it can be a major problem still in the orchard. And this running that through your system every month or so can help prevent the root rot. They used to have instructions for trunk injection, for soil drenching, for spraying on the foliage. Now they've taken the soil drench off the list. I'm not sure if it's not legal in California because it messes up the groundwater. I'm not sure what's going on there, but crunk injection and foliar spray is what they're telling me. You know, since we have a little in here, so in our newsletter, we mentioned this week because everyone's always asking about it. So if you wanted to make your plant actually stronger, so do know that fertilizers is not like when we eat food because it gives us energy. When you fertilize an avocado tree or fertilize any plant, fertilizer is not an energy source. This is building material. So it's like, okay, you're sick and you're weak, and someone gives you hammers and nails. That's what fertilizer is. It doesn't make you, so fertilizer doesn't make plants stronger. It gives them the minerals to grow, but it's not actually making them stronger. They're getting weaker when you feed them. That's why they say don't feed when they're blooming. Wait till a few months after they bloom. They want all the energy to go to the fruit, not to new leaves. So fertilizer is not an energy source at all. It's a building material. But there is a way you can make them stronger. So the plants, essentially are solar panels. The leaves are turning the energy of the sun and taking carbon dioxide and water and changing it into sugar. So CO2 and water, H2O, becomes C6H12O6, which is a sugar molecule, which is also the same formula as the cellulose in wood. So the bulk of the plant is made out of sugar. But that also powers up everything. It makes them, they have enough sugar in their stems, they can bloom, they can make new leaves. Everything they do is dependent on how much sugar storage they have. And back in the 80s, we saw an article in the Rare Fruit Growers Journal about spraying things with sugar to make them bloom better. So we tried it on an orange tree that had never fruited. I had it in the ground for 5 years, never fruited. We sprayed it, and the next year it had 200 fruit. But said, okay, was that reality or was that a coincidence? Was it going to fruit on its 6th year or was it not? So we sprayed. We had a plum tree, with lots of branches. We said, okay, let's spray one branch with this solution of sugar in the fall and see what that one branch will do. So the rest of the tree made about 5 fruit per branch. That one branch had 28 plums on it. We're going, okay, that seems to work. Again, we're not totally sure because we didn't do enough side-by-side testing. I mean, I should have sprayed like 3 separate branches on this tree. It's just, I might have just hit the perfect branch. I don't know. But it seems to work. So ever since those days, whenever we spray anything on any plant for any reason, we'll put the sugar in the spray. It seems to be worth it. So the original formula was 1 ounce of each of these in a gallon of water. So 1 ounce of molasses, 1 ounce of fish emulsion, 1 ounce of seaweed. So the molasses is the energy source. Now molasses also happens to have a lot of minerals in it that the plants want because this is essentially the juice from a sugar cane. So all stuff that makes sugarcane grow still is in here. The fish is mostly nitrogen, which plants need to make the membranes around the cells. So that's part of that growth. And then the seaweed is just whatever hormone the seaweed plant makes to grow really fast and really big. And so you spray this combination, 1 ounce of each in a gallon of water on any plant. It seems to grow bigger leaves faster. Now, if you spray things in the fall, when plants aren't programmed to grow anymore, they're programmed to save energy for next year's crop. That's when you get your bigger crop. If you spray them in the spring or summer, now spraying in the spring can help set the fruit that's on there because it's like extra sunlight on your leaves. But if you spray them in spring and summer, generally you just get faster growth, bigger leaves.
Do you think in spring and fall and spring or just fall? Or
You can spray as much as you want.
just
But for the crop purpose, the fall is the main time you would spray. The instructions were to spray 6 times, which is every 2 weeks in the fall, to get next year's crop better, and it certainly seemed to work on that one branch. But if you spray it on any plant, like these two products are definitely been pointed out by the giant pumpkin growers to be what they need to break 500 pounds. So if they don't cheat somehow, they can't make them bigger than a 500-pound pumpkin. But you can see, this combination certainly can work on just about anything you want to grow a monster thing with. We notice the leaves get bigger. Now I haven't sprayed these trees with this at all because they were at our growing ground. We don't take our sprayer to our growing ground. But a lot of the plants that are here, whenever we spray anything for anything, we have at least the molasses in there. Sometimes, if I spray the roses, I'll leave the fish out because it makes them smell funny. But we'll still keep the molasses, or Carol syrup. We use Carol syrup. We use table sugar. Molasses happens to have a lot of minerals in it that the other things do not. But Carol syrup, as far as the energy part works, that works too. Not a good replacement for regular fertilizer. This is just like icing on the cake. Makes them do a little bit more than they would have otherwise.
Say when you spray for anything, you mean like spraying for bugs, spraying for fungus, you add that to whatever you're spraying.
Right. What's interesting is 30 years ago, we had a product on the shelf called Spray Booster. You add it to any spray to make it stick on the plants better. Main ingredient was sugar. They had the chemical formula down, so it looked like a chemical. But you look at that going, that's sugar in there. So they just use sugar to make the stuff stick on the plants better. They just use sugar and alcohol. They had a few things in there, but they said the sugar was the main ingredient.
You can do that with spinosad. You need to have the oil. So
True. So, molasses can work as something to make whatever you're spraying stick better to the items you're spraying it on. Certainly. Yes.
That attract the bees as well.
No, they don't respond to sugar. They just respond to honey. And I don't know if honey is absorbed the same way that sugar is. And honey's more expensive than Carol syrup. So I'd go with different things for different.
How about honey and more?
Yeah, I haven't tried the honey to see if that makes plants grow faster. I think I don't know, I think there's more, well, molasses is, I don't know what the sugars are in molasses. If it's sucrose and fructose, I'm not certain. Because when they make molasses, when they're boiling down the sugar cane fluid and they take out most of whatever crystallizes out of there, and this is kind of what's left. There's still a lot of sugar in it that won't crystallize any further, and then there's some minerals in it, but I'm not sure what form of sugar it is. But apparently the plants absorb it, so. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, George.